Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories. Your gods and my gods. Do you or I know which are the stronger? Native proverb. East of Suez, some hold, the direct control of providence ceases, man being there handed over to the power of the gods and devils of Asia, and the Church of England only exercising an occasional and modified supervision in the case of Englishmen. This theory accounts for some of the more unnecessary horrors of life in India. It may be stretched to explain my story. My friend Strickland of the police, who knows as much of natives of India as is good for any man, can bear witness to the facts of the case. Dumois, our doctor, also saw what Strickland and I saw. The inference which he drew from the evidence was entirely incorrect. He is dead now. He died in a rather curious manner, which has been elsewhere described. When Fleet came to India, he owned a little money and some land in the Himalayas, near a place called Dharamsala. Both properties had been left him by an uncle, and he came out to finance them. He was a big, heavy, genial, and inoffensive man. His knowledge of natives was, of course, limited, and he complained of the difficulties of the language. He rode in from his place in the hills to spend New Year in the station, and he stayed with Strickland. On New Year's Eve there was a big dinner at the club, and the night was excusably wet. When men foregather from the utmost ends of the empire, they have a right to be riotous. The frontier had sent down a contingent of catch-em-alive-os who had not seen 20 white faces for a year, and were used to ride 15 miles to dinner at the next fort, at the risk of a Khyberee bullet where their drinks should lie. They profited by their new security, for they tried to play pool with a curled-up hedgehog found in the garden, and one of them carried the marker round the room in his teeth. Half a dozen planters had come in from the south and were talking horse to the biggest liar in Asia, who was trying to cap all their stories at once. Everybody was there, and there was a general closing up of ranks and taking stock of our losses in dead or disabled that had fallen during the past year. It was a very wet night, and I remember that we sang Auld Lang Syne with our feet in the Polo Championship Cup and our heads among the stars, and swore that we were all dear friends. Then some of us went away and annexed Burma, and some tried to open up the Sudan and were opened up by fuzzies in that cruel scrub outside Suakim. And some found stars and medals, and some were married, which was bad, and some did other things which were worse. And the others of us stayed in our chairs and strove to make money on insufficient experiences. Fleet began the night with sherry and bitters, drank champagne steadily up to dessert, then raw, rasping Capri with all the strength of whiskey, took Benedictine with his coffee, 4 or 5 whiskeys and sodas to improve his pool strokes, beer and bones at 2:30, winding up with old brandy. Consequently, when he came out at 3:30 in the morning, into 14 degrees of frost, he was very angry with his horse for coughing, and tried to leapfrog into the saddle. The horse broke away and went to his stables, so Strickland and I formed a guard of dishonor to take Fleet home. Our road lay through the bazaar, close to a little temple of Hanuman, the monkey god, who was a leading divinity worthy of respect. All gods have good points, just as have all priests. Personally, I attach much importance to Hanuman, and am kind to his people, the great gray apes of the hills. One never knows when one may want a friend. There was a light in the temple, and as we passed, we could hear voices of men chanting hymns. In a native temple, the priests rise at all hours of the night to do honor to their god. Before we could stop him, Fleet dashed up the steps, patted 2 priests on the back, and was gravely grinding the ashes of his cigar butt into the forehead of the red stone image of Hanuman. Strickland tried to drag him out, but he sat down and said solemnly, "Sridhart, Mark of the beast. I made it. Isn't it fine? In half a minute the temple was alive and noisy, and Strickland, who knew what came of polluting gods, said that things might occur. He, by virtue of his official position, long resided in the country, and weakness for going among the natives was known to the priests, and he felt unhappy. Fleet sat on the ground and refused to move. He said that Gerald Hanuman made a very soft pillow. Then, without any warning, a silver man came out of a recess behind the image of the god. He was perfectly naked in that bitter, bitter cold, and his body shone like frosted silver, for he was what the Bible calls a leper as white as snow. Also, he had no face, because he was a leper of some years' standing, and his disease was heavy upon him. We too stooped to haul Fleet up, and the temple was filling and filling with folk who seemed to spring from the earth, when the silver man ran in under our arms, making a noise exactly like the mewing of an otter, caught Fleet round the body, and dropped his head on Fleet's breast before we could wrench him away. Then he retired to a corner and sat mewing, while the crowd blocked all the doors. The priests were very angry until the silver man touched Fleet. That nuzzling seemed to sober them. At the end of a few minutes' silence, one of the priests came to Strickland and said in perfect English, "Take your friend away. He has done with Hanuman, but Hanuman has not done with him." The crowd gave room, and we carried Fleet into the road. Strickland was very angry. He said that we might all three have been knifed, and that Fleet should thank his stars that he had escaped without injury. Fleet thanked no one. He said that he wanted to go to bed. He was gorgeously drunk. We moved on, Strickland silent and wrathful, until Fleet was taken with violent shivering fits and sweating. He said that the smells of the bazaar were overpowering, and he wondered why slaughterhouses were permitted so near English residences. "Can't you smell the blood?" said Fleet. We put him to bed at last, just as the dawn was breaking, and Strickland invited me to have another whiskey and soda. While we were drinking, he talked of the trouble in the temple, and admitted that it baffled him completely. Strickland hates being mystified by natives, because his business in life is to overmatch them with their own weapons. He has not yet succeeded in doing this, but in 15 or 20 years he will have made some small progress. "They should have mauled us," he said, "instead of mewing at us. I wonder what they meant. I don't like it one little bit." I said that the managing committee of the temple would in all probability bring a criminal action against us for insulting their religion. There was a section of the Indian Penal Code which exactly met Fleet's offense. Strickland said he only hoped and prayed that they would do this. Before I left, I looked into Fleet's room and saw him lying on his right side, scratching his left breast. Then I went to bed, cold, depressed, and unhappy, at 7 o'clock in the morning. At 1 o'clock I rode over to Strickland's house to inquire after Fleet's head. I imagined that it would be a sore one. Fleet was breakfasting and seemed unwell. His temper was gone, for he was abusing the cook for not supplying him with an underdone chop. A man who can eat raw meat after a wet night is a curiosity. I told Fleet this, and he laughed. "You'll breed queer mosquitoes in these parts," he said. "I've been bitten to pieces, but only in one place." "Let's have a look at the bite," said Strickland. "It may have gone down since this morning." While the chops were being cooked, Fleet opened his shirt and showed us, just over his left breast, a mark, the perfect double of the black rosettes, the 5 or 6 irregular blotches arranged in a circle, on a leopard's hide. Strickland looked and said, "It was only pink this morning. It's grown black now." Fleet ran to a glass. "By Jove," he said, "this is nasty. What is it?" We could not answer. Here the chops came in, all red and juicy, and Fleet bolted 3 in a most offensive manner. He ate on his right grinders only and threw his head over his right shoulder as he snapped the meat. When he had finished, it struck him that he had been behaving strangely, for he said apologetically, "I don't think I ever felt so hungry in my life. I've bolted like an ostrich." After breakfast, Strickland said to me, "Don't go. Stay here, and stay for the night." Seeing that my house was not 3 miles from Strickland's, this request was absurd. But Strickland insisted, and was going to say something when Fleet interrupted by declaring in a shamefaced way that he felt hungry again. Strickland sent a man to my house to fetch over my bedding and a horse, and we 3 went down to Strickland's stables to pass the hours until it was time to go out for a ride. The man who has a weakness for horses never wearies of inspecting them, and when 2 men are killing time in this way, they gather knowledge and lies the one from the other. There were 5 horses in the stables, and I shall never forget the scene as we tried to look them over. They seemed to have gone mad. They reared and screamed and nearly tore up their pickets. They sweated and shivered and lathered and were distraught with fear. Strickland's horses used to know him as well as his dogs, which made the matter more curious. We left the stable for fear of the brutes throwing themselves in their panic. Then Strickland turned back and called me. The horses were still frightened, but they let us gentle and make much of them, and put their heads in our bosoms. "They aren't afraid of us," said Strickland. "Do you know, I'd give 3 months' pay if Outrage here could talk." But Outrage was dumb, and could only cuddle up to his master and blow out his nostrils, as is the custom of horses when they wish to explain things but can't. Fleet came up when they were in the stalls, and as soon as the horses saw him, their fright broke out afresh. It was all that we could do to escape from the place unkicked. Strickland said, "They don't seem to love you, Fleet." "Nonsense," said Fleet. "My mare will follow me like a dog." He went to her. She was in a loose box, but as he slipped the bar, she plunged, knocked him down, and broke away into the garden. I laughed, but Strickland was not amused. He took his mustache in both fists and pulled at it till it nearly came out. Fleet, instead of going off to chase his property, yawned, saying that he felt sleepy. He went to the house to lie down, which was a foolish way of spending New Year's Day. Strickland sat with me in the stables and asked if I had noticed anything peculiar in Fleet's manner. I said that he ate his food like a beast, but that this might have been the result of living alone in the hills out of the reach of society as refined and elevating as ours, for instance. Strickland was not amused. I do not think that he listened to me, for his next sentence referred to the mark on Fleet's breast, and I said that it might have been caused by blister flies, or that it was possibly a birthmark, newly born, and now visible for the first time. We both agreed that it was unpleasant to look at, and Strickland found occasion to say that I was a fool. "I can't tell you what I think now," he said, "because you would call me a madman. But you must stay with me for the next few days if you can. I want you to watch Fleet, but don't tell me what you think till I have made up my mind." "But I am dining out tonight," I said. "So am I," said Strickland, "and so is Fleet. At least if he doesn't change his mind." We walked about the garden smoking but saying nothing, because we were friends and talking spoils good tobacco, till our pipes were out. Then we went to wake up Fleet. He was wide awake and fidgeting about his room. "I say, I want some more chops," he said. "Can I get them?" We laughed and said, "Go and change, the ponies will be round in a minute." "All right," said Fleet. "I'll go when I get the chops. Underdone ones, mind." He seemed to be quite in earnest. It was 4 o'clock and we had had breakfast at 1. Still, for a long time he demanded those underdone chops. Then he changed into riding clothes and went out into the veranda. His pony, the mare had not been caught, would not let him come near. All 3 horses were unmanageable, mad with fear, and finally Fleet said that he would stay at home and get something to eat. Strickland and I rode out, wondering. As we passed the temple of Hanuman, the silver man came out and mewed at us. "He is not one of the regular priests of the temple," said Strickland. "I think I should peculiarly like to lay my hands on him." There was no spring in our gallop on the racecourse that evening. The horses were stale and moved as though they had been ridden out. "The fright after breakfast has been too much for them," said Strickland. That was the only remark he made through the remainder of the ride. Once or twice I think he swore to himself, but that did not count. We came back in the dark at 7 o'clock and saw that there were no lights in the bungalow. "Careless ruffians my servants are," said Strickland. My horse reared something on the carriage drive, and Fleet stood up under its nose. "What are you doing groveling about the garden?" said Strickland. But both horses bolted and nearly threw us. We dismounted by the stables and returned to Fleet, who was on his hands and knees under the orange bushes. "What the devil's wrong with you?" said Strickland. Nothing in the world," said Fleet, speaking very quickly and thickly. "I've been gardening, botanizing, you know. The smell of the earth is delightful. I think I'm going for a walk. A long walk. All night." Then I saw that there was something excessively out of order somewhere, and I said to Strickland, "I am not dining out." "Bless you," said Strickland. "Here, Fleet, get up. You'll catch fever there. Come in to dinner and let's have the lamps lit. We'll all dine at home." Fleet stood up unwillingly and said, No lamps, it's much nicer here. Let's dine outside and have some more chops. Lots of 'em and underdone, bloody ones with gristle." Now a December evening in northern India is bitterly cold, and Fleet's suggestion was that of a maniac. "Come in," said Strickland sternly. "Come in at once." Fleet came, and when the lamps were brought, we saw that he was literally plastered with dirt from head to foot. He must have been rolling in the garden. He shrank from the light and went to his room. His eyes were horrible to look at. There was a green light behind them, not in them, if you understand, and the man's lower lip hung down. Strickland said, "There is going to be trouble, big trouble, tonight. Don't you change your writing things." We waited and waited for Fleet's reappearance, and ordered dinner in the meantime. We could hear him moving about his own room, but there was no light there. Presently from the room came the long-drawn howl of a wolf. People write and talk lightly of blood running cold and hair standing up and things of that kind. Both sensations are too horrible to be trifled with. My heart stopped as though a knife had been driven through it, and Strickland turned as white as the tablecloth. The howl was repeated, and was answered by another howl far across the fields. That set the gilded roof on the horror. Strickland dashed. I followed, and we saw Fleet getting out of the window. He made beast noises in the back of his throat. He could not answer us when we shouted at him. He spat. I don't quite remember what followed, but I think that Strickland must have stunned him with the long bootjack, or else I should never have been able to sit on his chest. Fleet could not speak, he could only snarl, and his snarls were those of a wolf, not of a man. The human spirit must have been giving way all day and have died out with the twilight. We were dealing with a beast that had once been Fleet. The affair was beyond any human and rational experience. I tried to say hydrophobia, but the word wouldn't come, because I knew that I was lying. We bound this beast with leather thongs of the punka rope, and tied its thumbs and big toes together, and gagged it with a shoehorn, which makes a very efficient gag if you know how to arrange it. Then we carried it into the dining room and sent a man to Demoise, the doctor, telling him to come over at once. After we had dispatched the messenger and were drawing breath, Strickland said, It's no good. This isn't any doctor's work. I also knew that he spoke the truth. The beast's head was free, and it threw it about from side to side. Anyone entering the room would have believed that we were carrying a wolf's pelt. That was the most loathsome accessory of all. Strickland sat with his chin in the heel of his fist, watching the beast as it wriggled on the ground, but saying nothing. The shirt had been torn open in the scuffle and showed the black rosette mark on the left breast. It stood out like a blister. In the silence of the watching, we heard something without, mewing like a she-otter. We both rose to our feet, and I answer for myself, not Strickland, felt sick. Actually and physically sick. We told each other, as did the men in Pinafore, that it was the cat. Dumois arrived, and I never saw a little man so unprofessionally shocked. He said that it was a heart-rending case of hydrophobia, and that nothing could be done. At least any palliative measures would only prolong the agony. The beast was foaming at the mouth. Fleet, as we told Dumois, had been bitten by dogs once or twice. Any man who keeps half a dozen terriers must expect a nip now and again. Dumois could offer no help. He could only certify that Fleet was dying of hydrophobia. The beast was then howling, for it had managed to spit out the shoehorn. Dumois said that he would be ready to certify to the cause of death, and that the end was certain. He was a good little man, and he offered to remain with us, but Strickland refused the kindness. He did not wish to poison Dumois' New Year. He would only ask him not to give the real cause of Fleet's death to the public. So Dumois left, deeply agitated, and as soon as the noise of the cartwheels had died away, Strickland told me in a whisper his suspicions. They were so wildly improbable that he dared not say them out aloud, and I, who entertained all Strickland's beliefs, was so ashamed of owning to them that I pretended to disbelieve. Even if the Silver Man had bewitched Fleet for polluting the image of Hanuman, the punishment could not have fallen so quickly. As I was whispering this, the cry outside the house rose again, and the beast fell into a fresh paroxysm of struggling until we were afraid that the thongs that held it would give way. "Watch," said Strickland. "If this happens 6 times, I shall take the law into my own hands. I order you to help me." He went into his room and came out in a few minutes with the barrels of an old shotgun, a piece of fishing line, some thick cord, and his heavy wooden bedstead. I reported that the convulsions had followed the cry by 2 seconds in each case, and the beast seemed perceptibly weaker. Strickland muttered, "But he can't take away the life. He can't take away the life." I said, though I knew that I was arguing against myself, "It may be a cat. It must be a cat. If the Silver Man is responsible, why does he dare to come here?" Strickland arranged the wood on the hearth, put the gun barrels into the glow of the fire, spread the twine on the table, and broke a walking stick in 2. There was 1 yard of fishing line, gut, lapped with wire, such as is used for manseer fishing, and he tied the 2 ends together in a loop. Then he said, "How can we catch him? He must be taken alive and unhurt." I said that we must trust in Providence, and go out softly with polo sticks into the shrubbery at the front of the house. The man or animal that made the cry was evidently moving round the house as regularly as a night watchman. We could wait in the bushes till he came by and knock him over. Strickland accepted the suggestion, and we slipped out from a bathroom window into the front veranda, and then across the carriage drive into the bushes. In the moonlight we could see the leper coming round the corner of the house. He was perfectly naked, and from time to time he mewed and stopped to dance with his shadow. It was an unattractive sight, and thinking of poor Fleet, brought to such degradation by so foul a creature, I put away all my doubts and resolved to help Strickland from the heated gun barrels to the loop of twine, from the loins to the head and back again, with all tortures that might be needful. The leper halted in the front porch for a moment, and we jumped out on him with the sticks. He was wonderfully strong, and we were afraid that he might escape or be fatally injured before we caught him. We had an idea that lepers were frail creatures, but this proved to be incorrect. Strickland knocked his legs from under him, and I put my foot on his neck. He mewed hideously, and even through my riding boots I could feel that his flesh was not the flesh of a clean man. He struck at us with his hand and feet stumps. We looped the lash of a dog whip around him, under the armpits, and dragged him backwards into the hall, and so into the dining room where the beast lay. There we tied him with trunk straps. He made no attempt to escape, but mewed. When we confronted him with the beast, the scene was beyond description. The beast doubled backwards into a bow as though he had been poisoned with strychnine, and moaned in the most pitiable fashion. Several other things happened also, but they cannot be put down here. "I think I was right," said Strickland. "Now we will ask him to cure this case." But the leper only mewed. Strickland wrapped the towel round his hand and took the gun barrels out of the fire. I put the half of the broken walking stick through the loop of the fishing line and buckled the leper comfortably to Strickland's bedstead. I understood then how men and women and little children can endure to see a witch burnt alive, for the beast was moaning on the floor, and though the silver man had no face, you could see horrible feelings passing through the slab that took its place, exactly as waves of heat play across red-hot iron. Gun barrels, for instance. Strickland shaded his eyes with his hands for a moment, and we got to work. This part is not to be printed. The dawn was beginning to break when the leper spoke. His mewings had not been satisfactory up to that point. The beast had fainted from exhaustion, and the house was very still. We unstrapped the leper and told him to take away the evil spirit. He crawled to the beast and laid his hand upon the left breast. That was all. Then he fell face down and whined, drawing in his breath as he did so. We watched the face of the beast and saw the soul of Fleet coming back into the eyes. Then a sweat broke out on the forehead, and the eyes, they were human eyes, closed. We waited for an hour, but Fleet still slept. We carried him to his room and bade the leper go, giving him the bedstead and the sheet on the bedstead to cover his nakedness, the gloves and the towels with which we had touched him, and the whip that had been hooked around his body. He put the sheet about him and went out into the early morning without speaking or mewing. Strickland wiped his face and sat down. A night gong, far away in the city, made 7 o'clock. "Exactly 24 hours, said Strickland, "and I've done enough to ensure my dismissal from the service, besides permanent quarters in a lunatic asylum. Do you believe that we are awake?" The red-hot gun barrel had fallen on the floor and was singeing the carpet. The smell was entirely real. That morning at 11 we two together went to wake up Fleet. We looked and saw that the black leopard rosette on his chest had disappeared. He was very drowsy and tired, but as soon as he saw us he said, "Oh, confound you fellows! Happy New Year to you! Never mix your liquors. I'm nearly dead." "Thanks for your kindness, but you're over time," said Strickland. "Today is the morning of the 2nd. You slept the clock round with a vengeance." The door opened, and little Dumoise put his head in. He had come on foot and fancied that we were laying out Fleet. "I brought a nurse," said Dumoise. "I suppose that you can come in for what is necessary?" "By all means," said Fleet cheerily, sitting up in bed. "Bring on your nurses." Dumoise was dumb. Strickland led him out and explained that there must have been a mistake in the diagnosis. Dumoise remained dumb and left the house hastily. He considered that his professional reputation had been injured and was inclined to make a personal matter of the recovery. Strickland went out too. When he came back, he said that he had been to call on the temple of Hanuman to offer redress for the pollution of the god. and had been solemnly assured that no white man had ever touched the idol, and that he was an incarnation of all the virtues laboring under a delusion. "What do you think?" said Strickland. I said, "There are more things," but Strickland hates that quotation. He says that I have worn it threadbare. One other curious thing happened which frightened me as much as anything in all the night's work. When Fleet was dressed, he came into the dining room and sniffed. He had a quaint trick of moving his nose when he sniffed. "Horrid doggy smell here," said he. "You should really keep those terriers of yours in better order. Try sulphur, Strick." But Strickland did not answer. He caught hold of the back of a chair and, without warning, went into an amazing fit of hysterics. It is terrible to see a strong man overtaken with hysteria. Then it struck me that we had fought for Fleet's soul with the silver man in that room, and had disgraced ourselves as Englishmen forever. And I laughed and gasped and gurgled just as shamefully as Strickland, while Fleet thought that we had both gone mad. We never told him what we had done. Some years later, when Strickland had married and was a church-going member of society for his wife's sake, we reviewed the incident dispassionately, and Strickland suggested that I should put it before the public. I cannot myself see that this step is likely to clear up the mystery, because, in the first place, no one will believe a rather unpleasant story, and, in the second, it is well known to every right-minded man that the gods of the heathen are stone and brass, and any attempt to deal with them otherwise is justly condemned. The end. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe our channel for more stories.
Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories. Ernest clutched the doll to his chest. His Nana had given it to him for his 8th birthday. The doll, which he'd named Kevin, was a ventriloquist dummy. It was also his best friend. In his usual spot under the deck, well hidden behind the pump for the hot tub, Ernest could hear his parents arguing as if he were in the same room. His parents often went out to the deck to argue, completely unaware that Ernest was tucked away listening in. It had become a habit for both parties. "You don't find it the least bit creepy," his father said. The clink of ice against the glass as it was set down on the railing made Ernest's teeth chatter, and he had a bad feeling. His stomach did flip-flops like the time he had eaten the leftover egg salad after the cookout. She meant well. His mother said, her voice sounded tired, like it always did lately when she talked to his father. Ernest's father snorted. "She's eccentric," his mother added. Ernest didn't know what that meant, but assumed it wasn't good. That's the understatement of the year. Now she's trying to get her hooks into Ernest and color him with her own brand of crazy. That's harsh. Come on, Linda. The kid is already awkward enough without giving him a ventriloquist dummy. What's next? An accordion. Geez, Pete. Great sensitivity. Ernest isn't awkward. The doctor said it's just a phase, a normal part of growing up. Fancy doctor speak for weird. I can't talk to you. Footsteps. Then the sound of the sliding glass door opening, and then forcibly shut. His father didn't follow. He finished his drink. Ernest could picture him downing it in one gulp before going inside. He heard him mumble something that sounded like, "Ought to burn it when he's asleep," and then sighed heavily before going back inside the house. Ernest stayed where he was, held his breath, and waited. When they didn't return, he breathed out. "It's going to be right, Kevin. I won't let anything happen to you," Ernest said to his doll. He peeked out of the small hole in the wood frame. The coast was clear. After another minute had passed, he crawled out from his hiding spot only to bump into Penelope, his older sister. "Hey, weirdo, what are you doing in there?" Ernest scowled at her but said nothing. It was none of her business, then started to walk away. "Boys don't play with dolls," she called. Unless what? He whipped around to face her, daring her to say it. "Maybe you think you're a girl. Do not. Do too," she said in a sing-song voice. "Let me see it." She made to grab Kevin from him. That's when he heard a creak and then a rip. "You broke his arm," Ernest said. "What are you going to do about it? You going to cry? Cry like a little baby? I heard you talking to your doll." "They don't talk back, dummy." She pointed and laughed. "Dummy 1 and dummy 2. Ernest swallowed his tears. He couldn't let her see him cry. "You're stupid," Ernest yelled, his face red with the effort, and he clutched Kevin even tighter to his chest and ran away. That night, Ernest's mother came to tuck him in for the night. She sat down on the edge of his bed and stroked his hair. She was all made up and wearing a pretty dress. She and Daddy must be going out tonight. "Would you like me to read you a story? Do you have time?" "Yes, darling, I always have time for a story." Ernest scrunched up his face like he was concentrating. "Let me ask Kevin." He turned to his new pal, whispered, then leaned his left ear toward the doll as if waiting for an answer. "Are you sure?" he asked the doll. "Okay," he said, then turned back to his mom. "Not tonight, Mama. Kevin is tired, but he thinks you look real pretty." The corners of her mouth turned up. "Why, thank you, Kevin," she said, addressing the doll directly, then turned to her son. "That was very kind of him." The warmth in her voice genuine. "I think so too," Ernest said. His mother leaned over and kissed him on his forehead. "Don't forget, Kevin." At this she raised her brows, but then pecked his forehead too. A dark silhouette filled the doorway, blocking the hall light. "Let's go, Linda. It's getting late." His father didn't enter Ernest's room. "The babysitter is here." "Jackie." Ernest perked up a bit. "She was nice." Dad thought so too. "No, dear," his mother said. "Mrs. Humboldt." Ernest frowned. He didn't like her. She was mean. She never let him have his favorites like Oreos or shallot chip ice cream. "Just go to sleep. When you wake up in the morning, we'll be here. No funny business," his dad said, shutting the door behind his mother. Ernest had no idea what kind of funny businesses his father expected him to get up to, especially at this hour, but he rolled over careful not to squash Kevin's bandaged arm. Ernest's mom had sewed it for him after seeing all the duct tape, which Ernest had learned was not made from ducks, after trying to patch the rip himself. When his mother asked him what happened, Ernest didn't squeal on Penelope, even though it was her fault that Kevin's arm had nearly been torn off, and she deserved to be punished for what she'd done. Ernest's eyes snapped open. He was wide awake, but he wasn't in his room. A strip of moonlight carved a long swath across his sister's bed. Something gleamed on the floor. Scissors. Bits of hair, too. His heart sped up, but to Ernest it felt as if a tiny gremlin inside his chest was banging against his ribcage, demanding to be let out. Something was wrong. He stepped closer to Penelope to get a better look and then clamped his hand over his mouth when he saw her. Someone had cut off 2 large hunks of her long blonde hair. It was the thing she was most proud of, brushing it 100 strokes every night. Kevin was lying on the floor at the foot of her bed. Like tiny fingers crawling up his spine, an odd sensation crept over Ernest. His pajamas felt damp. His skin was clammy, covered in a sheen of cold sweat, and he had a sudden urge to pee. I've never walked in my sleep before. But that wasn't what bothered him, and he pushed the uneasy thought aside. How would he explain what happened? He reached for Kevin, careful not to make a sound, and scooped him up. Should I pick up the hair too? Not daring to take his eyes off his sister, he slowly backed out of her room, terrified she'd wake, and yet, afraid of being alone too. He had one foot over the threshold when the hallway filled with light. Ernest froze. A woman's laugh, shushing sounds. Then more laughter as his parents made their way up the stairs, just now returning from their evening out. Ernest had no idea how late it was, but knew he wasn't supposed to be out of bed, and there was no time to run back to his room. "Ernie, sweetheart," his mother called gently. "What are you doing out of bed? Tell them you were going to the bathroom." But Ernest couldn't seem to find the words, and before he could answer, his father brushed past him and entered Penelope's room. "What the hell happened in here?" his father said. Ernest squeezed his eyes shut. If only he could just disappear. "Honey, what's wrong?" His mother's voice concerned, but not alarmed, and Ernest wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or his father, until he felt meaty fingers grip his arm. "Did you do this?" his father demanded, yanking Ernest back into Penelope's bedroom with one hand, the scissors in his other. At the same time, his sister stirred awake and his mother gasped. Ernest shook his head hard enough that he made himself dizzy. "Daddy," Penelope called, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. With a glance at Ernest, his mother rushed over to Penelope. "Well, if you didn't do it, who did?" his father hollered, brandishing the scissors. Ernest shrugged and kept his eyes on the floor. "I don't know. But that was I." Ernest knew. His stomach tightened and he tried to hide Kevin behind his back, even though his father towered over him and could see what he was doing. "Gimme that thing." His father made a grab for Kevin. "Ouch!" his father yelped and pulled his hand back, dropping Kevin on the floor. "What's the matter?" his mother said. "I cut my hand on something sharp." A sudden scream cut him off. Penelope had seen the hair. His mother sat on the bed to soothe her, but her attention was drawn back to his father. "For heaven's sake, Pete, you're getting blood on the carpet," she said. And Ernest wondered if his mother was more upset about a ruined carpet than his father's injury. In response, his father stuck his finger in his mouth and sucked the blood. Gross. But Ernest knew better than to make a face. Instead, he kept real still, willing himself to become invisible. "Stay here," his father said, then stomped toward the bathroom. Where would Ernest go? Though he had the urge to bolt down the stairs and out the door. The sound of the tap, and then Linda. His father shouted, "What's wrong?" His mother called in exasperation. Penelope's cries had dissolved into quiet whimpers. Kevin was still lying on the hallway floor, and Ernest bent to pick him up as his mother ran past him. "You're in big trouble," Penelope said, coming up behind him, her voice laced with menace, her tear-stained face full of anger. Though she was eyeing Kevin, Ernest took a step back, both afraid for and afraid of Kevin. "I didn't do it," Ernest said. His voice was weak. She advanced on him, made to grab Kevin, but Ernest held him tight. They struggled. Penelope cried out, and Kevin landed on the floor between them. Both parents came running. "Now what?" his mother said. His sister was sobbing and clutching her hand to her chest. "Let me see, Pen." She reached toward her, taking Penelope's hands into her own, then screamed. There were bite marks on Penelope's hand, and they were too small to be Ernest's. The end. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe our channel for more stories.
Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy our narrated stories.
I have always noticed a prevalent want of courage, even among persons of superior intelligence and culture, as to imparting their own psychological experiences when those have been of a strange sort. Almost all men are afraid that what they could relate in such wise would find no parallel or response in a listener's internal life, and might be suspected or laughed at. a truthful traveler who should have seen some extraordinary creature in the likeness of a sea serpent, would have no fear of mentioning it, but the same traveler, having had some singular presentiment, impulse, vagary of thought, visions so-called, dream, or other remarkable mental impression, would hesitate considerably before he would own to it. To this reticence I attribute much of the obscurity in which such subjects are involved. We do not habitually communicate our experiences of these subjective things as we do our experiences of objective creation. The consequence is that the general stock of experience in this regard appears exceptional, and really is so, in respect of being miserably imperfect. In what I am going to relate, I have no intention of setting up, opposing, or supporting any theory whatever. I know the history of the bookseller of Berlin. I have studied the case of the wife of a late astronomer royal, as related by Sir David Brewster, and I have followed the minutest details of a much more remarkable case of spectral illusion occurring within my private circle of friends. It may be necessary to state, as to this last, that the sufferer, a lady, was in no degree, however distant, related to me. A mistaken assumption on that head might suggest an explanation of a part of my own case, but only a part, which would be wholly without foundation. I cannot be referred to my inheritance of any developed peculiarity, nor had I ever before any at all similar experience, nor have I ever had any at all similar experience since. It does not signify how many years ago, or how few, a certain murder was committed in England, which attracted great attention. We hear more than enough of murderers as they rise in succession to their atrocious eminence, and I would bury the memory of this particular brute, if I could, as his body was buried in Newgate Jail. I purposely abstain from giving any direct clue to the criminal's individuality. When the murder was first discovered, no suspicion fell, or I ought to say, for I cannot be too precise in my facts, it was nowhere publicly hinted that any suspicion fell on the man who was afterwards brought to trial. As no reference was at that time made to him in the newspapers, it is obviously impossible that any description of him can at that time have been given in the newspapers. It is essential that this fact be remembered. Unfolding at breakfast my morning paper containing the account of that first discovery, I found it to be deeply interesting, and I read it with close attention. I read it twice, if not 3 times. The discovery had been made in a bedroom, and when I laid down the paper, I was aware of a flash, rush, flow. I do not know what to call it. No word I can find is satisfactorily descriptive, in which I seemed to see that bedroom passing through my room, like a picture impossibly painted on a running river. Though almost instantaneous in its passing, it was perfectly clear, so clear that I distinctly, and with a sense of relief, observed the absence of the dead body from the bed. It was in no romantic place that I had this curious sensation, but in chambers in Piccadilly, very near the corner of St. James Street. It was entirely new to me. I was in my easy chair at the moment, and the sensation was accompanied with a peculiar shiver which started the chair from its position. But it is to be noted that the chair ran easily on casters. I went to one of the windows. There are 2 in the room, and the room is on the 2nd floor, to refresh my eyes with the moving objects down in Piccadilly. It was a bright autumn morning, and the street was sparkling and cheerful. The wind was high. As I looked out, it brought down from the park a quantity of fallen leaves, which a gust took and whirled into a spiral pillar. As the pillar fell and the leaves dispersed, I saw 2 men on the opposite side of the way, going from west to east. They were one behind the other. The foremost man often looked back over his shoulder. The second man followed him at a distance of some 30 paces, with his right hand menacingly raised. First, the singularity and steadiness of this threatening gesture in so public a thoroughfare attracted my attention, and next, the more remarkable circumstance that nobody heeded it. Both men threaded their way among the other passengers with a smoothness hardly consistent even with the action of walking on a pavement, and no single creature that I could see gave them place, touched them, or looked after them. In passing before my window, they both stared up at me. I saw their two faces very distinctly, and I knew that I could recognize them anywhere. Not that I had consciously noticed anything very remarkable in either face, except that the man who went first had an unusually lowering appearance, and that the face of the man who followed him was of the color of impure wax. I am a bachelor, and my valet and his wife constitute my whole establishment. My occupation is in a certain branch bank, and I wish that my duties as head of a department were as light as they are popularly supposed to be. They kept me in town that autumn when I stood in need of change. I was not ill, but I was not well. My reader is to make the most that can be reasonably made of my feeling jaded, having a depressing sense upon me of a monotonous life, and being slightly dyspeptic. I am assured by my renowned doctor that my real state of health at that time justifies no stronger description, and I quote his own from his written answer to my request for it. As the circumstances of the murder gradually unraveling took stronger and stronger possession of the public mind, I kept them away from mine by knowing as little about them as was possible in the midst of the universal excitement. But I knew that a verdict of willful murder had been found against the suspected murderer, and that he had been committed to Newgate for trial. I also knew that his trial had been postponed over 1 sessions of the Central Criminal Court on the ground of general prejudice and want of time for the preparation of the defense. I may further have known, but I believe I did not, when or about when the sessions to which his trial stood postponed would come on. My sitting room, bedroom, and dressing room are all on one floor. With the last, there is no communication but through the bedroom. True, there is a door in it, once communicating with the staircase, but a part of the fitting of my bath has been, and had been then for some years, fixed across it. At the same period, and as a part of the same arrangement, the door had been nailed up and canvassed over. I was standing in my bedroom late one night, giving some directions to my servant before he went to bed. My face was towards the only available door of communication with the dressing room, and it was closed. My servant's back was towards that door. While I was speaking to him, I saw it open and a man look in, who very earnestly and mysteriously beckoned to me. The man was the man who had gone second from the two along Piccadilly, and whose face was of the color of impure wax. The figure, having beckoned, drew back and closed the door. With no longer pause than was made by my crossing the bedroom, I opened the dressing-room door and looked in. I had a lighted candle already in my hand. I felt no inward expectation of seeing the figure in the dressing-room, and I did not see it there. Conscious that my servant stood amazed, I turned round to him and said, "Derek, could you believe that in my cool senses I fancied I saw a—" As I there laid my hand upon his breast, with a sudden start he trembled violently and said, "Oh, Lord, yes, sir, a dead man beckoning." Now, I do not believe that this John Derek, my trusty and attached servant for more than 20 years, had any impression whatever of having seen such a figure until I touched him. The change in him was so startling when I touched him that I fully believe he derived his impression in some occult manner from me at that instant. I bade John Derrick bring me some brandy, and I gave him a dram and was glad to take one myself. Of what had preceded the night's phenomenon I told him not a single word. Reflecting on it, I was absolutely certain that I had never seen that face before, except on the one occasion in Piccadilly. Comparing its expression when beckoning at the door with its expression when it had stared up at me as I stood at my window, I came to the conclusion that on the first occasion it had sought to fasten itself upon my memory, and on the second occasion it had made sure of being immediately remembered. I was not very comfortable that night, though I felt a certainty, difficult to explain, that the figure would not return. At daylight I fell into a heavy sleep, from which I was awakened by John Derrick's coming to my bedside with a paper in his hand. This paper, it appeared, had been the subject of an altercation at the door between its bearer and my servant. It was a summons to me to serve upon a jury at the forthcoming sessions of the Central Criminal Court at the Old Bailey. I had never before been summoned on such a jury, as John Derrick well knew. He believed, I am not certain at this hour whether with reason or otherwise, that class of jurors were customarily chosen on a lower qualification than mine, and he had at first refused to accept the summons. The man who served it had taken the matter very coolly. He said that my attendance or non-attendance was nothing to him. There the summons was, and I should deal with it at my own peril and not at his. For a day or two I was undecided whether to respond to this call or take no notice of it. I was not conscious of the slightest mysterious bias, influence, or attention one way or another. Of that I am as strictly sure as of every other statement that I make here. Ultimately I decided, as a break in the monotony of my life, that I would go. The appointed morning was a raw morning in the month of November. There was a dense brown fog in Piccadilly, and it became positively black, and in the last degree oppressive, east of Temple Bar. I found the passages and staircases of the courthouse flaringly lighted with gas, and the court itself similarly illuminated. I think that until I was conducted by officers into the old court and saw its crowded state, I did not know that the murderer was to be tried that day. I think that until I was so helped into the old court with considerable difficulty, I did not know into which of the two courts sitting my summons would take me. But this must not be received as a positive assertion, for I am not completely satisfied in my mind on either point. I took my seat in the place appropriated to jurors in waiting, and I looked about the court as well as I could through the cloud of fog and breath that was heavy in it. I noticed the black vapor hanging like a murky curtain outside the great windows, and I noticed the stifled sound of wheels on straw or tan that was littered in the street. Also, the hum of the people gathered there, which a shrill whistle or a louder song or hail than the rest occasionally pierced. Soon afterwards, the judges, 2 in number, entered and took their seats. The buzz in the court was awfully hushed. The direction was given to put the murderer to the bar. He appeared there, and in that same instant I recognized in him the first of the 2 men who had gone down Piccadilly. If my name had been called then, I doubt if I could have answered to it audibly. But it was called about 6th or 8th in the panel, and I was by that time able to say, "Here." Now observe, as I stepped into the box, the prisoner, who had been looking on attentively but with no sign of concern, became violently agitated and begged to his attorney. The prisoner's wish to challenge me was so manifest that it occasioned a pause, during which the attorney, with his hand upon the dock, whispered with his client and shook his head. I afterwards had it from that gentleman that the prisoner's first affrighted words to him were, "At all hazards, challenge that man!" But that as he could give no reason for it, and admitted that he had not even known my name until he heard it called and I appeared, it was not done. Both on the ground already explained, that I wished to avoid reviving an unwholesome memory of that murderer, and also because a detailed account of his long trial is by no means indispensable to my narrative, I shall confine myself closely to such incidents in the 10 days and nights during which we, the jury, were kept together, as directly bear on my own curious personal experience. It is to that, and not to a page of the Newgate calendar, that I beg attention. I was chosen foreman of the jury. On the second morning of the trial, after evidence had been taken for 2 hours, I heard the church clock strike. Happening to cast my eyes over my brother jurymen, I found an inexplicable difficulty in counting them. I counted them several times, yet always with the same difficulty. In short, I made them one too many. I touched the brother juryman whose place was next me, and I whispered to him, "Oblige me by counting us." He looked surprised by the request, but turned his head and counted. "Why," says he suddenly, "we are but no, that is not possible. No, we are 12. According to my counting that day, we were always right in detail, but in the gross we were always one too many. There was no appearance, no figure to account for it. But I had an inward foreshadowing